Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, Russia, China and the US all three of them have come forward with statements supporting de-escalation between Pakistan and India through talks. The UN has also offered to mediate between the two countries, given that both countries will take them as a third-party intermediary. Now, tensions have escalated between Pakistan and India, with reports of Indian forces readying for a strike across the line of control following an attack last week in Indian-occupied Kashmir, where 44 Indian soldiers died. Let me tell you a little about that incident before we continue. What should have been a day of love and generosity, it ended in blood in Indian-occupied Kashmir on 14th of February. More than 40 Central Reserve police officers were killed after a car fitted with explosives rammed into a bus carrying paramilitary forces in Pulwama district. There was strong condemnation from across the world, including from Pakistan. However, the anti-Pakistan rhetoric in India has come in full swing and shows no sign of abating. On social media, across news outlets, and even politicians are not far behind, expressing hatred and anger towards their neighbor even before investigations have concluded. Let's hear from one of the senior officials in India.
Prime Minister of Pakistan refuses to acknowledge the attack on our security forces in Pulwama as an act of terrorism. Prime Minister of Pakistan has neither chosen to condemn this heinous act nor condoled with the bereaved families. Disclaiming any link between the terrorist attack and Pakistan is an oft-repeated excuse by Pakistan. The Pakistani Prime Minister has ignored claims made by the Jaish-e-Mohammed as well as by the terrorist who perpetrated this heinous crime. It is a well-known fact that Jaish-e-Mohammed and its leader Masood Azhar are based in Pakistan. This should be sufficient proof for Pakistan to take action.
Just hours after the Pulwama incident, an unfortunate incident indeed, the Foreign Office of Pakistan released a statement condemning the attack. Leaders from across the board also shared their regret and sadness of the lives lost. The war hysteria and the media jingoism continues to rise in India, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party facing what looks like an increasingly close contest in the upcoming general elections in India this year. Head of Amnesty International India has warned it is a dangerous time in India, as at least 100 Kashmiri students have fled from Dehradun and Ambala amid tensions mounting since the Pulwama attack. Now, Pakistani nationals in Rajasthan's Bikaner have been asked to leave the city within 48 hours by a district magistrate order, which is in effect immediately. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, at The Hague, the International Court of Justice is in its third day of hearing the case of consular access for Kulbhushan Jadhav. Jadhav was sentenced to death by a Pakistani military court in 2017 after the Indian spy was arrested in Pakistan under a fake Muslim name on an official Indian passport. Now, tensions continue to escalate between the two. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has come out and given a historical speech yesterday as well, addressing the incident that took place in Pulwama. Let's quickly take a listen to what he had to say.
Today, I offer the Indian government that if they want to investigate this incident in any way to make sure that no Pakistani was involved in this, we are willing to do so. If you have any actionable intelligence that Pakistan is involved, share that with us. I guarantee you that Pakistan will take action, not because Pakistan is succumbing to any pressure, but because Pakistan is strongly against the use of its land for such a purpose.
As tensions rise between the nuclear-armed countries, it is a great concern to everyone alike across the world. The UN has also come out and given a statement concerning this.
Looking at the situation in general between India and Pakistan, we're deeply concerned at the increase in tensions between the two countries in the wake of the attack on Indian security personnel on February 14th in Pulwama. The Secretary General stresses the importance for both sides to exercise maximum restraint and take immediate steps to de-escalation, and his good officers are always available should both sides ask.
We have heard UN offer their ability to offer their help to come in between and mediate. Of course, that would depend on whether India breaks the habit and takes the offer for a change for a third party to intervene to further investigate the news today, which is making headlines across the South Asia region. Let me welcome our guests. First of all, we have Mr. Uzair Kayani, a professor of international law at Lahore University of Management Sciences here in Lahore. And also from London, we are joined by Mr. Muzzamil Ayub Thakur. He's a political analyst. And from Islamabad, Air Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry, a defense analyst, will also be joining us. All of you three, welcome to Newswire. Air Marshal Shahzad, let me start with you. Taking in the situation as it's escalating day by day, how do you take the statement coming from the UN, especially after a letter was written by the foreign minister of Pakistan asking for their help?
Clearly, I think when you have two nuclear nations in the world, all on the verge of conflict or statements or belligerence that amounts to entering into a conflict, it's a matter of concern for everybody, not only for the citizens of the two countries. And that should have taken attention or notice all over the world, which it has in the shape of these statements that you just mentioned. But will something come out of it? If you hear that out, I think the last part says that if both sides want us to intervene, then we will. I think that's an area that India has been hiding behind for a long, long time now. A 71-year-old problem or an issue now become a bane for the entire region. Essentially lies on that particular part of the issue at the United Nations when it says that both sides need to come to us to be able for us to do something. Although it is a UNSC resolution for it to do something and intervene on behalf of the people of Kashmir. I think what's important is for Pakistan to take it to the world that it's no more a territorial problem. It's no more a problem between India and Pakistan. It's a problem of human rights. It's a problem of human life. It's a problem of the right of life for the citizens of Kashmir, for the Kashmiri people. It is, of course, a problem or a heinous oppression being subjected on the Kashmiri Muslims, as indeed Muslims all over. So I think it's a matter of concern for Pakistan, and Pakistan is on the verge of not only bilaterally looking at how India reacts to this kind of allegations that it makes against Pakistan, but also the fact that if something emerges out of it, what is it that Pakistan can do to deter Indian aggression, to make sure that India stays within the realm of sanity and rationality, and also the fact that the Kashmiris don't suffer as much as a possibility or as a reaction from the Indian
And that is something we are seeing again and again, that even in India's tensions escalating, Kashmiris are the ones who are suffering the most, as we have seen reports of the students being evacuated from cities in India. But Mr. Muzzamil, let me quickly come to you. Kashmir has been a sticking point between the two. Russia has spoken out and not only said that they need to have political talks to solve this, but also warned that please don't bring this issue to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where they are expected to participate. What does this say about the international community regarding this issue between Pakistan and India?
Situations like this don't seem to change the international opinion in any shape or form. Although that this attack that happened in Pulwama was a military attack, at the same time, I find it rather concerning that when the Indian army causes rampage and murders and pellet injuries, and they kill indiscriminately and they rape Indian-occupied Kashmir, the international community doesn't seem to have any interest in that. And yet when a combatant fights another combatant, and the combatant dies, it seems to cause an outrage internationally, which is a little worrying, because when it comes to civilians, there is no outrage whatsoever. We talk about cases of Quran Pushpura, Asio Nilofer, Hibba, who was 18 months old with pellets. We talk about 19-year-old girls that are killed, or young boys that are slapped with public safety acts and jailed away for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. We talk about the human rights atrocities, literally atrocities, gross human rights violations that are being perpetrated inside Kashmir. To the extent of extinction of an entire nation, human rights violations amounting to war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing. And yet when one combatant, a Kashmiri, attacks another combatant, where there are 700,000 military armed personnel, it seems to cause some kind of uproar, and people seem to be surprised, and they seem to send condolences to the military personnel and to the government of India. For what purpose? There is a war going on. This is expected. Why are they there?
So, Air Marshal Shahzad, let me come to you. It's a very valid point. The atrocities going on in Kashmir remain completely, do not move the international community until the most militarized zone, in one of the most militarized zones with about 1 million soldiers stationed there, when they get attacked, suddenly everybody sits up and takes notice. Is this the success of the Indian propaganda here?
No, I don't think it's the success of the Indian propaganda. If anything, it actually shows to the world the Indian face, the real face of India. India has been subjecting these people to their state oppression and brutal methods a long time now. It was mentioned the rape of the women, for example, the pelletized blindness caused to many young girls and boys, to the point that today I think a Kashmiri is not scared to die for the freedom of his land. I think that point has arrived where people in India, the thinking people in India, are saying India has lost Kashmir. And I say, add to that and say that it's just a matter of time when Kashmiris will win Kashmir for themselves. It's just because of the failure of the Indian policies that Kashmir has reached that point. 71 years they had to be able to politically integrate the Kashmiris with them, if at all, despite the fact that it was a problem between India and Pakistan. But they failed miserably in trying to, in social form, in a political form, to try and integrate them. And that's a failure of the Indian policy. And that has come back to haunt them.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but what is the issue that they keep hanging on to Kashmir despite the fact they refuse to recognize this is an indigenous movement as a reaction to their strong arm tactics in Indian occupied Kashmir? What is it that they refuse? Why is it that they refuse to acknowledge that it is time to take this seriously?
I think it's a tipping point in the sense that the Indians or the world at large has been looking at Kashmir as a problem between India and Pakistan, two states spoiling for a piece of land. That's how the world has looked at it, and therefore there's been the Simla agreement after that, and of course before that was the UN resolution, which has held us back into modicums that have not let this particular problem come to the fore. These two nations have been more so in terms of, because despite their wars and everything, not been able to make that into a human rights issue. But in the last decade or so, and let me say that ever since this BJP government came into power, this particular movement within Kashmir is as indigenous as it can be. It is a call for independence. It's a call for their independence. It's a call for their right to life. And that is what has changed the entire paradigm of Kashmir. It's no more a problem of India and Pakistan. It's a problem of the people of Kashmir, the Kashmiris, human beings living there. And that is what is being taken notice of by the world at large. This is where the world has gradually begun to realize that there is something happening there which is not right. Second part, had it been East Timor or South Sudan, perhaps the entire world have gotten together to get them independence. These are people of a different faith, like those in Palestine, unfortunately, languishing under oppression and still subjected to pain and misery and blood and gross injustice. And I think that is what is needed for Pakistanis, the state of Pakistan, to take to the world and bring it to the notice of the world at large and say, this is what we need to do right away and help the people of Kashmir.
Stay with us, Air Marshal. We're going to move on and welcome Ambassador Zamir Akram, who is joining us from Islamabad. Welcome to Newswire. Let me ask you this. The Foreign Minister of Pakistan writes a letter to the top UN chief. Is this an unprecedented move? Does it add to the hysteria that is existing between Pakistan and India right now, or does it help?
Well, I don't think it's an irresponsible move. I would consider this as a very responsible thing to do, which is to ask the United Nations to take notice of the escalating situation in South Asia between India and Pakistan, and also to use his office to bring about a de-escalation, plus focus on the real underlying issue in Kashmir, which is the Kashmir dispute and the Indian violations of human rights in Kashmir. So I think this is a responsible move by the foreign minister, and I think that the Secretary General should take action. And this is, by the way, not the first time. We have written to this UN Secretary General before as well.
Right. And coming back to you, Air Marshal Shahzad, when you saw, we actually even spoke to the foreign minister yesterday, and he said he's asked the Secretary General of the UN to circulate this letter as much as he can so that the reality on the ground can be conveyed. Is this a policy that will force, you feel, or pressurize India to come to the table to address this issue?
Look, this is one plank. This is one part of the policy. And I think the Pakistani PR, permanent representative there at the United Nations, has done a great job in the last few years, ever since she's been there in trying to bring this to fore the problem of Kashmiris and the issue of Kashmir. She's done very well. And you can see the difference in how the UN now responds to this particular issue, or for that matter, any issue related to Pakistan and India. So that's a good progress. But that is not the only thing. Like I said, this is the right legal move to make. This is the legality of the whole thing, and we cannot simply wish that away, and nobody can wish that away simply because it lies within the tenets of United Nations own Security Council resolutions. So therefore, we got to continue to repeat that, continue to remind the world of its commitment towards the Kashmiris and to the region. But at the same time, like I said, there is this message to be taken to the world capitals by our Foreign Office, by our leadership, and which must indicate that the issue is now far beyond territorial issues that has perhaps been considered or conceived for India and Pakistan, and it's far more a human issue now. And we need to somehow bring this entire this particular war, so to say, or the oppression to cease. It must cease to enable life to the Kashmiris. That's a message from the human right perspective or the human life perspective to go to the people of the world, and therefore that is something that Pakistan must also additionally do.
Thank you so much, Air Marshal Shahzad, for your contribution. Let me bring the question to you, Mr. Uzair. We're talking about the legality of it. UN cannot, and correct me if I'm wrong, cannot interfere or mediate right now unless both parties agree to it, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I agree with a lot that's been said, but I think an additional aspect that we need to look at, perhaps reconsider Pakistan's stance on this issue is just slightly, is that, going back to Muzzamil's point that he made earlier, by engaging in this sort of offer to investigate in Pakistan and making the case that Pakistan itself has been a victim of terrorism, we inadvertently might send a signal that we're equating what's happening in Kashmir to the terrorism that's happening in Pakistan. And I think that's something that we should reconsider. As was pointed out in Kashmir, in this particular incident, the target was military and there was a combatant, there were combatants on both sides. Whereas in Pakistan, a lot of the attacks that have happened have targeted civilians. And likewise in Kashmir, a lot of the actions that have taken place involving the Indian military have targeted civilians, sometimes combatants, but sometimes civilians. We cannot equate an attack on civilians to an attack on combatants. We cannot, and we should not uncritically suggest that what's happened in Kashmir is terrorism, given that it is so different from the kinds of violence that has been perpetrated in Kashmir on civilians and also in Pakistan.
That's a critical point, but hold that thought. Mr. Muzzamil, do you agree with this take that Mr. Uzair has, that in a way, when Prime Minister Imran Khan yesterday said that we have fought terrorism in our borders ourselves and we are ready to investigate and contribute in whatever way we can to the investigation, is this endorsing that this is a similar scenario what happened in Pulwama?
I think Pakistan has suffered a lot, and it's an open secret of exactly what's been happening in Pakistan and who is responsible for certain activities that have happened in Pakistan. And Prime Minister Imran Khan, the nuanced approach that he has taken, the delicate approach that he has taken, is very admirable, considering the attack in Kashmir was pure military. It was a pure military attack. And also considering that the way that the Indian system reacts to Kashmiris across India and inside Kashmir on civilians, that in itself is terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism. But the same state also sponsors terrorism inside Pakistan. So knowing all of this, Imran Khan, as the Prime Minister, has to be very balanced in his approach of what to say and how to say it. And I think that he's done a fantastic job in trying to convey the right message without warmongering, as the Indians have done. And when you compare him to Narendra Modi and a lot of the BJP or the right-wing parties that are inside India at the moment, and the way that they are warmongering for this election, I mean, it's some kind of nonsensical electioneering inside India, but it seems to work for them. All the creepy crawlies come out from the rocks, and they start becoming some kind of representing the populist movement. But that said, at the same time, it has to be remembered that international law is paramount here. And I think what the Air Marshal also mentioned in regards to if both parties go to the United Nations, but at the same time, it's not East Timor, it's not South Sudan. But we also have to remember that there are people that seem to stick their fingers and their noses into other people's businesses, irregardless of what's going on. In the situation of Kashmir, apart from Pakistan, I don't think there has been anybody else that has been supporting the Kashmiris in any shape or form. We do have Turkey, we do have Azerbaijan, some members of other Islamic countries. However, no keen interest is taken. And I think until Pakistan stretches its wings a little bit and puts a little bit more pressure on the rest of the international world, the United Nations as a body is one thing. But then there are certain countries inside the United Nations that can also be pushed to not only just take a stand, but have actionable policy.
Okay, but hold that thought. Mr. Uzair, coming back to you, is Pakistan doing enough in terms of making the international community aware of the situation at hand? Obviously, it's a grave concern when Indian forces are stationed ready for attack across the line of control.
Right. Well, Pakistan is certainly doing a lot of right things, but given the PR muscle that India has and the kinds of cases it makes generally, we can always do more. I think it's absolutely right to emphasize that de-escalation is the right idea. As a matter of policy, that's always right. But we need to balance that. In going for de-escalation, we need to, or encouraging de-escalation, or even if mediation, which India would not agree to, we need to make sure that we don't compromise our stance on the aspirations of the Kashmiri people. That becomes a bit of a balancing act. So we do want de-escalation, we do want talks. That's exactly what the Prime Minister said, so that's to his credit. But we also want to ensure that we don't buy into the Indian narrative by becoming reactive. As has been emphasized by the Air Marshal and some others, this isn't just an India versus Pakistan issue. It is primarily an issue of Kashmiris themselves. It's an issue that's raised by the Kashmiri diaspora in the United Kingdom, and rightly so. And so to emphasize that human rights angle, I think it's dangerous to turn this into just a Pakistan versus India issue. We are the only advocates that Kashmir has, and we need to pay more attention to just making the case that Kashmiris themselves are an indispensable party in this process.
But here's the problem, Mr. Muzzamil, that just having the humanitarian side of it has not raked in any kind of support from the international community. Even now when we hear US speak about that tensions need to be sorted out, de-escalated between the two countries, it still implies its support to India in so many words as saying that the root cause was from Pakistan. That doesn't clearly help to the situation, does it?
You're absolutely right. Every time something happens inside Kashmir, there is always this part of the international narrative that seems to say that Pakistan and India must come to the table and must talk, without actually directly saying that it's India that isn't actually going to the negotiating table, number one. And number two, whatever is happening inside Kashmir, why on earth are you blaming Pakistan that are hundreds and thousands of miles away? And it's indigenous people taking up their arms. It's indigenous youth, local indigenous youth, reacting to what the policies and state-sponsored terrorism by India. It's indigenous Kashmiris outside of Kashmir that are lobbying for the right of self-determination with the support of Pakistan. Constantly, the narrative seems to be, and you have to give credit where it is due, particularly to India, who have been able to sweep this new narrative, the Indian narrative, that it's so-called insurgency. And I use this term extremely delicately, so-called insurgency, because they themselves, the Indian government themselves, have said that the insurgency has been near non-negligible. So that said, how can they keep on constantly asking the international community to demand that Pakistan stops its actions inside Kashmir? I mean, where physically is Pakistan inside Kashmir? Nowhere. It is India that is inside Kashmir. It is Indian policy that is causing the chaos inside Kashmir. It is Indian activities that is causing a reaction inside Kashmir. And I know maybe I may be stretching this a bit too far, but the recent attack that happened inside Kashmir, General Huda recently said that it's impossible that 350 kilograms of explosives could have traveled from Pakistan into Kashmir. Now, there are two things that we must remember from this statement. Number one is the fact that he is trying to protect his own army by saying that we are not that incompetent on the borders, on the line of control. Or he is implying that it was an inside job, it was a false flag operation. In both instances, India is culpable. Pakistan has nothing to do with this at all. And I again stress that it was one combatant, a Kashmiri, fighting another combatant, the Indians. This is war, this is what happens, and this is natural part of the armed resistance.
I want to get into investigating further what the Indian General Huda said of explosives in this Pulwama attack having been sourced locally. But first, we're going to take a quick short break. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire, talking about the Pulwama attack in Indian-occupied Kashmir and the consequent fallout in social media, news outlets, and even politicians of India getting involved, causing escalation of tensions between Pakistan and India. Just recently, a development came in. An Indian commander announced that it was just not possible to source that large amount of explosives, some over 700 pounds of explosives within the region, which is known to be the most militarized in the world today. Let me come back to Ambassador Zamir. We were talking about this with our guest earlier, just trying to reflect on past incidents that have taken place where India has turned around and blamed Pakistan, only to find out in investigations later that the cause was within its borders.
Well, there was the Pathankot incident and the Uri incident very recently, where, again, as typical in a knee-jerk reaction, the Indians blamed Pakistan, but then failed to come up with any kind of evidence at all to link Pakistan to those incidents. I would also go far as to recall here for people that India's own behavior in terms of the Samjhota Express blast, which killed several Pakistanis, has never been the people involved have never been really punished. Actually, they were people from the Indian armed forces that were known to be involved, but they were never really brought to justice. And the same is true of what was earlier rightly called by one of the speakers as Indian-sponsored state terrorism, which is what I think it is when, in terms of the way the people of occupied Jammu and Kashmir are being treated by the Indian forces. And none of them who have been responsible for these gross human rights violations have ever been brought to justice. So I think that for the Indians to be calling us terrorists, I think they should look towards themselves and see their own track record in this regard.
So here I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib, who is joining us from Islamabad. He's the defense analyst. Asking you, General, what is your take on this? Is this the hysteria built up to galvanize votes by Modi, as BJP is looking for a really tight contest ahead of the general elections?
The problem is that this hysteria, once it is created, then it becomes very difficult to get it subsided. And then people's expectations are there and they start pressurizing the government to take some action. So that is how you spoil the atmosphere in the region. But this hysteria definitely has been created with the purpose of winning the elections, because Modi has tasted this formula once and he secured a success in the previous elections. So naturally, he's trying to do it again, but with a little more, you can say, a little more hysteria added to it. Now, we must realize that election is just one issue that he would like to capitalize on this incident. But on the other hand, if you look at it, there are 3-4 principal objectives of Indian foreign policy towards Pakistan. One is that they have been talking about it very vocally, off and on, they have been saying that we want to isolate Pakistan diplomatically. So this is one objective. Then the other one is that you get Pakistan declared as a terrorist state so that Pakistan loses its credibility and nobody listens to Pakistan. They have been, to some extent, they have been successful in convincing because they enjoy the support of some of the big powers like America. And the other one is that, they are facing the international criticism because of the atrocities which they are committing in Kashmir. So recently, we saw that Human Rights Commission report from the United Nations, and Pakistan has been talking about it. We have been carrying that report to the European capitals. That again was a big problem for Indians. So they were out to perform some kind of this false flag operation, or if there is anything that they could tell to the rest of the world that in Kashmir we do not have any struggle for independence. It is, as a matter of fact, Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. So with this incident, I think they are dumbing this narrative very effectively, and they have been receiving pathetic messages from various capitals. This is dangerous. See, when it's a civilian uprising, or when the people are demonstrating, protesting, and they're just pelting stones, it's a minor sort of thing, and you cannot be allowed even to use the pellet guns.
Right.
But once it is accepted that it's a war against terror and there's terrorism and you're fighting,
then everything becomes justified. I'm sorry to interrupt you here, the lack of time. I'm going to quickly throw this question at you. There's one view of this, that this is not election-created hysteria. This is one of those situations where the hysteria has taken a life of its own, as there have been previous elections where, without referring to Pakistan as a terrorist state, they've been victory. Like, for example, in Vajpayee's case, Manmohan Singh's case. But so, do you believe maybe that is also a situation that is prevailing where things have spun out of control?
I think Modi all along has been very, very aggressive. His style of politics is much different. He has been, usually I think he has been progressing on dead bodies, and he has been using these incidents or the violence to promote his own agenda. Perhaps he has that mentality too, but at the same time this has been paying. And people who have been killing Muslims all over in India, they have never been punished. So you have an encouragement from the law. So, Modi, ever since he came to the power, there have been many killings of minorities, particularly the Muslims. I think this is the mindset which perhaps was not there earlier on. Of course, we know that BJP has some kind of radicalized policy, but on the other hand, Modi perhaps is the terrorist. The mind he has is a terrorist mind. So naturally, he won't care if there is any war, if there is any, if there are more killings in the country. Okay. He's a different type of person.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution there. That was Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib talking to us. But Mr. Uzair, coming to you, do you think that maybe this is a possibility, that it is not just the election hysteria, it is something beyond that that's spun out of control within India?
Well, I think there is some persuasive evidence that it is election-related. Prior to these particular attacks, the BJP government did walk out of an alliance that allowed for a government in Kashmir. All of these movements started happening just before this election that's coming up. So that is persuasive evidence that it is linked to the stoking up of hysteria is linked to the elections. It's always possible that it may morph into a Frankenstein's monster that's much beyond that and then lead to undesirable consequences. But the election motive seems clear. On a related point, while we're talking to Kashmir, on Kashmir, I think it is important to ask the question, even in these election circumstances, from a Pakistani perspective, about whether an armed resistance to occupation is ever justified. If it is justified, surely Kashmir is one of these, it would be the easiest case to make, given the scale of oppression that's happened and the time frame of oppression that's happened in Pakistan. Right. So we do need to emphasize that point as well, that in some circumstances, unless we're saying, which I don't think has ever been any country's position or the international opposition, that armed resistance to occupation is never justified, if there is armed resistance that is targeting the military, we should not criticize that unless it is illegal under international law in some way. Armed resistance of this type, to my best understanding, is not illegal. It's targeting the military that is occupying your land, and there's UN resolutions on the other side.
Okay, and Ambassador Zamir also reflecting a little about something that Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib said. One of the reasons why India is taking this aggressive stance, trying to isolate Pakistan, we are seeing a lot of development coming in through CPEC. We're seeing the Crown Prince Saudi Arabia investing so many billions. And also our role in Afghan-Taliban talks. Do you think that may be a threat to India in some way?
I think they've come to realize how miserably it has failed because of the factors that you mentioned. CPEC, the Saudi investments, and the Pakistani role in trying to promote a settlement in Kashmir. I think that this has really upset the Indians, and they certainly do not want to see a settlement in Kashmir, a settlement in Afghanistan, in which the Taliban would have a role, because they see the Taliban as being friendlier and close to Pakistan, which they feel would undermine their interests. So, yes, certainly they will try and use this incident to try and scuttle these processes, but I don't think that they will succeed, because the interests of the other players in this kind of engagement with Pakistan are far too greater than what they can be made to suffer at India's behest.
All right, thank you so much, Ambassador, for giving us your input there. I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Waheed Arshad joining us from Lahore. He's a defense analyst. Welcome to Newswire. We're talking a little about India's war hysteria and jingoism that we're seeing in their media across the board, politicians. Is Pakistan's regional importance gaining ground a threat to India, and maybe this is the reaction of this?
Well, I think it is. I mean, it is the Indian stated policy that they will isolate Pakistan diplomatically, both regionally as well as internationally, and harm its economy. And this is not the first time they've announced this statement. This has been done many years back, since Modi came to power. So I think, but it's a very unrealistic sort of policy in the present world. You really can't isolate any country, whether it's big or small, wherever it is located. Things have changed. The dynamics of international politics have changed. So I think the Indians is going to fire back on them.
And we've seen as a result within India, there has been a huge reaction online and offline on the streets against groups. Kashmiri students have been trying to take refuge, running from Dehradun. This kind of sort of situation, when it unfolds, will it help BJP at all in securing votes?
I think the BJP is desperate to win the next elections, and since they came to power, they came to power on the Hindutva vote. It's not the same India anymore. Initially, you had secular nationalism. Indian nationalism is replaced by Hindu nationalism, and targeting Muslims, other minorities, is something not new. It is being done since 5-6 years. And now that the Kashmiris have been targeted because the person who carried out the suicide bombing was a Kashmiri. So I think it's just politics, and Indians are good at externalizing their internal issues, blaming Pakistan and everybody else for their own internal problems. And I don't think it's going to help BJP. They might get the Hindu vote, yes, but not the whole Hindu vote, I think. I think it's going to fire back on them in their internal politics also.
All right, thank you so much for your input. Now I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Moin, Din Haider, who is also a defense analyst. He's joining us from Karachi. Let me ask you this, in terms of the situation as it's developing between Pakistan and India after the Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech. India has turned around and said that these are all just excuses by the Prime Minister. How do you take that response?
I think our Prime Minister gave a very positive and balanced speech, covering all the important issues in a few sentences, offering investigations if there is something in it. And he says, if there are culprits in Pakistan, he will punish them. And he said he is going to cooperate. He said, but look after the problem of Kashmir, why people are out to give their lives and it is not subsiding. And third thing which he conveyed and warned them, that if you think of any misadventure, you will find us more than ready to respond it immediately.
So, Lieutenant General, there's another accusation from India that Pakistan is misleading the international community and should take credible and visible action against the perpetrators of Pulwama attack. When it makes that statement, does it just refer to the Pulwama attack, or is it across? Can you hear me?
I think this is a totally false statement by India. The world knows what is going on in Kashmir. The world knows what is going on through the length and breadth of India, how much hatred is there, how minorities are being mistreated, people eating beef are being killed, and he is continuously, killing Kashmiris. I think the whole world knows their ambassador, their military attaches, their intelligence agencies know about it. It is a different matter that the world is not admonishing India, but India cannot mislead anymore. These things are happening in the daylight, and in this 21st century, everything is visible from the satellite and from the ground.
But, Lieutenant General, do you see any kind of de-escalation being possible through international intervention? Can the UN really do anything about it, since India has a history of not letting third parties intervene?
Yes, this has been the problem. India knows its case on Kashmir is very weak, and that is one reason they don't come to the drink table. Secondly, there have been sincere efforts by America and others advising that we should resume dialogue, and there have been a few useful dialogues and some confidence-building measures like trade across Wagah, like Muzaffarabad, Srinagar bus service, and some limited trade across the LOC. But, every time is a small excuse. We go back 5 steps. We take 1 step forward and 5 steps backward.
Right.
That's the problem with India.
That's the problem with India. Right. Thank you so much, Lieutenant General, for your input. Coming back to you, Muzzamil, let's quickly shed some light before we run out of time completely on the show on the Jadhav case that is being heard at The Hague by the International Court of Justice. Pakistan has come up with its statement saying that India has failed to answer fundamental questions.
When it comes to the Ayub case, it exposes a lot of Indian crimes inside not just Kashmir, but now in Pakistan. We can go back several decades. We can link a lot of other atrocities that have happened inside Pakistan to the Indian state. You have, without naming names or locations, but you have certain issues there which can also be expressed at the ICJ. But what I'm interested in is, while they're in the ICJ, will Pakistan raise the issue of Kashmir and bring about an end to the human rights violations and the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, and the unlimited use of force inside Kashmir, which is against international law. But with Yadav, I think that this is a prime opportunity to expose Indian crimes, not just within their own borders, but the exportation of terrorism, the language that they use, the attempts to expose their neighbors across the border. This is exactly what they're doing. So what they are accusing Pakistan of doing is something that they are the primary guilty party of. And I think that Pakistan is after a very long time, Pakistan have a fantastic opportunity to expose Indian crimes, not just within their own borders, but also what's happening in Kashmir, and finally be able to change that nonsensical narrative that India have been perpetuating all over the world.
So, Uzair, let me bring you in here. Do you feel that Pakistan is making the best of this opportunity at The Hague in declaring or showing what India has been doing, not just in Balochistan in terms of unrest, but also more and more across the route that CPEC is developing?
Yes, I think in general, so the ICJ in general, the way that this case is going, had a narrow jurisdictional and a narrow legal question to consider when it started out, which was whether or not consular access should have been given under Article 36 of the VCCR. And after that, through the Indian litigation or through their approach, it has morphed into this political grandstanding political theater, which has turned into not the VCCR, but more issues about whether how the military courts work in Pakistan, how the internal criminal justice system works, and so forth. So I think the best response to that is a theatrical or political kind of response, which does emphasize Indian involvement in Pakistan, in terrorism, and so forth. The narrow legal issue, I think, has almost become, and this is a problem for the ICJ and its
limited jurisdiction.
It's limited jurisdiction, but also its perception as an arbiter, to consider issues which are unrelated to the VCCR, to the specific issue of consular relations, because they've been raised by India. I think that threatens to create a perception where the ICJ is becoming more politicized. So I think they should try to avoid that.
And Mr. Muzzamil, very quickly coming to you, we've got 30 seconds left in the show. How do you see this going forward? Do you see the escalation turning into a military misadventure from either side, or do you see maybe this being a golden opportunity for highlighting Kashmir?
I think it's a golden opportunity for Pakistan to expose Indian crimes, but I also think that in any attempt by India to flex their muscles or try to attempt a surgical strike or military intervention on Pakistan will result in a massive failure. We've already seen the false and fake attempts at surgical strikes inside Pakistan. It's not going to amount to anything. It's a matter of flexing muscles just for the elections, in my opinion. However, with the mass hysteria, as people have mentioned, that is going on, it could turn into a Frankenstein's monster, as somebody has mentioned, that they will be forced to take some kind of action. So far, they've been banning and boycotting Pakistani goods and actors and singers. And I think that although I don't propose reactionary methods, but I think that Pakistan should also consider the same thing, without not necessarily military action, but international pressure and also boycotting of Indian goods.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Muzzamil, Mr. Uzair, for joining us here on Newswire. We've come to the end of our show. And as this news develops between Pakistan and India, and of course the case hearing at the ICJ, we will keep you updated. Keep watching Indus News. You've been watching Newswire.